This is Radiomaster's new release, the GX12, and this might be the most significant radio or controller release since the original DualShock PlayStation controller. Man, Radiomaster is pulling out all the stops. Now, what do you notice right away? This has a black with white lettering OLED screen at the top. It has dual antennas because this is tri-band radio technology. This uses regular Express LRS 2.4, but it also uses the dual receiver Gemini, all internal to this. And I believe there's even some ability to connect to some of the 900 megahertz receivers. I did just put my bind phrase on here, nothing else, and it connected to one of my regular Express LRS Tiny Whoops. What are the other nice things on here? First and foremost, let's shout out the biggest thing of this. This is a new gimbal size, the GX gimbals. Now, these are CNC machined. They're bigger than the AG01 minis that I have on the Zorro right here. In fact, they're a little bit closer to the full-size AG01, and that's spectacular. Radiomaster has been releasing all kind of gimbal options. They even have this super tiny AG01 Micro that goes for the pocket radio. Look how small that is. These are really good. They're going to feel good in the hand, but if you're a racer like me or somebody that really needs to stick by that muscle memory, having that same stick throw is key. This being almost the same means that you should be able to adjust and acclimate a little bit better.
Now, Detective John Gimbal is going to try to measure each gimbal size.
I'm Detective John Gimbal.
To see what the actual difference is. So what I did was measure the opening horizontally and then measure the opening like this vertically. But what was happening was the new GX gimbal and the AG01 were coming out the same measurement, but I knew that wasn't right because I could tell it was just smaller. And I think it's more just than the fact that the AG01 is an M4 and the new GX is a smaller M3. So I reached out to Kebab, who is the expert on all gimbal throw distances, and he was saying what you actually have to do is measure how much the stick goes at the bottom all the way to the top. So you want to measure the end of the stick, not the base. And that's so hard to do, like out in floating space. Like, I tried as much as I possibly could and I still couldn't quite do it. So I'm just going to put the measurements that I got at the base. Rest assured, the AG01 is still the biggest.
And look how compact this thing is. The reason why a lot of us started switching to the Boxer was because of its smaller size compared to the full TX16. But on the new GX12, you have dual antennas right here that fold and store away perfectly. Now, your switch layout is going to be much closer to the Zorro. In fact, it's almost identical. So there's 4 switches up here, and then there's these little rockery things, but they also leave you some free switch space. So if you wanted to get a couple of these, you could add.
You can get me a switch.
A what now?
2 more switches to give you a total of 6. Now, one of the things I don't love about my Boxer is these little buttons right here. They don't exist on the GX12, but they do have some buttons on the front, and I feel like they're similarly spongy. They look nice, and I love how beautiful it is with the blue LEDs. Speaking of LED treatment, you're going to upgrade all the way around moving to this radio. In the past, Radiomaster has used sort of this generic orange LEDs for the buttons, and you have this 6-position switch that you can move over, and guess what? It's orange. This new version of the 6-position switch actually can light up a different programmable color based on which button you're doing. Now, what do we use that for? Those of us that do team racing, we can go and show up with up to 6 quads, or some people even more, and you assign a button to each quad if you're doing a team race. It feels really nice in the hand. I really like how the Zorro is just a tiny bit matte plastic. It feels a little bit more premium, and this is somewhat similar. It's a little bit more satiny, but still feels really good. And let's first recap at why this is so significant. If you remember 2 of Radiomaster's less popular releases, the Zorro and the TX12, Both of these share a lot of really good things. They're both a little bit smaller. They both fit in your hand really, really well. But there was a couple of things that prevented either one of these from being my daily driver. Now, the TX12 was actually really, really perfectly sized, but the plastic is just a little bit cheap. This one was meant to be well under $100, and it just didn't feel premium enough. The Zorro actually did feel premium. It's much more of a gamer controller style, and it fits in the hand so perfectly, but they decided to use 18500 cells on this, which was less than optimal, meaning your battery would run out a little bit too soon for my taste, being somebody that flies a lot. The other thing was that this uses the AG01 mini gimbals. That means that these are CNC machine full featured gimbals that feel amazing, but the size on them is a little bit smaller than your full size AG01 like this on the TX16S, which is the same exact size that is on the Boxer release. This one had a full-size battery tray and a full-size module bay. And what the GX12 does is it combines a lot of that. This has full-size battery tray right here. Look at this. This is a 2170 holder, and I can fit 2170s in there. No problem. You can get a ton of battery life on here. Little things like the buttons, the actual Edge TX buttons right here, they don't light up, but they're black with white print, making it much easier to read them when you're outdoors trying to change one of your radio settings. This like sort of matte black with just lettering scribed in but not printed is a little bit harder to read. So I appreciate that they're upgrading the LEDs, they're upgrading the buttons. This should go up to 1,000 milliwatt express LRS transmission power. And guess what they've done? They have a little metal heatsink fan output right here on the top to make sure it gets nice, clean ventilation throughout this radio. It's not going to overheat. Check out the bottom. No USB-C there. Why is that significant? Because every other Radiomaster has USB-C on the bottom for charging and USB-C on the top for plugging into your simulator. Now we finally have one USB-C port on the top that can do it all. You can plug it in and play sim, and guess what, guys? It will actually charge as you're simming. I ran the radio down to 7.9, plugged it in, simmed for an hour, and it was up to like 8.1. So that's a pretty good sign. I can't tell you how many times I've been doing the weekly FMV simulator race on Thursday night. And if I didn't have my radio full charged, we usually have our radios on for a couple of hours at a time. And if I didn't remember to charge, I'd have to be trickle charging in between my races, and that's just not something that you want to have to deal with in a stressful racing environment. On the Boxer, look how far the gimbal is inset into the body of the radio. That determines like where the fulcrum point of your gimbal stick moving as you're moving it around. And look at this one, it's almost flush to the top. That's not necessarily good or bad, it's just different. And that means if I'd switch to this, my muscle memory would need a little bit of time to adjust. I also feel that the gimbal stick tension on the traditional AG01 is much stiffer, which is I like, than a little bit of a looser feeling on the GX gimbals. Now there is some adjustment that you can do on the back to get them a little bit tighter, but I feel like you probably still won't get that same level of tightness. Again, that's not a good or bad, that's just a preference thing. Here's one thing though, I have all these radios, I have like 5 other ones across the room, and my radio stopped working at a big race in Houston, Texas. If you saw Heads Up FPV's video where he won that ticket to go over to Arab Emirates and race, I scored 5th in that. On someone else's radio. That's right, my radio stopped working. It actually turned out my radio did not die. The SD card contents just got corrupted, but I couldn't figure that out. I tried changing batteries, I tried everything, I couldn't fix it. I was gonna have to drive home 2.5 hours to go get another radio. Thankfully, Derek had a spare TX16S, so I had to adjust in just a couple of packs to a totally different radio, and I managed to do that pretty well. His sticks were much looser than I normally like mine, but I adjusted fine. So I'm actually experimenting with making some of my sticks a little bit looser than I normally do. And so again, the tension is just preference. If you're starting out today, the easy recommendation for the majority of pilots has been go the Boxer. This is $180 if you get the Crush version. It's not going to be this exact colorway, but that's a really good deal with the upgraded gimbals. This one, here's what the story is going to be for me. If I'm traveling, I'm taking this. I'm not taking this. It just fits in a smaller container if I'm traveling and I want to fly a couple of packs. I had access to smaller radios, but I just really didn't want to risk in a travel scenario, muscle memory causing me to crash and then having to go hiking or something to retrieve a drone. But this is close enough to where I can fly anything in a non-competition scenario, no problem. I'm also probably going to keep this in the trunk of my car at all times from now on.
My name is John Kimball, and I love my car.
If I do have another issue where a radio goes down, I'm going to have my own backup in place. And I feel like the test that I've done to try to determine, is this close enough to this? I played these things back to back to back to back on simulator, flying a track for 15 minutes on here, then moving to here for 15 minutes and back and forth. And the key to that exercise is to see, can I beat my time? And I could. Now, the first 5 minutes every time was me crashing because the muscle memory feels a little bit different. This is a little bit looser. The distance is a little bit different. There's actually some maneuvers on this. I think this is still slightly smaller than AG01 left to right. And that is something that I have a little bit of difficulty hitting consistently the edges of the gimbal on my Boxer. And on this, I actually was better. Now, on some maneuvers, I was better here. So it's kind of a toss-up. I think you could acclimate and get really, really good with either one. So it's up to your own preference. This is kind of something that I didn't expect. I was like, where does Radiomaster go from here? Because the Boxer is almost a perfect radio, and now we can see the future. They are improving LED setup, they're improving the screen, they're improving so many other things that are going to make it easier to use this in the field, and they're shrinking the size even further. For a lot of people, I think this is going to be the first step now if you got a little bit of money in the bank, because it's compatible with more versions of Express LRS out of the box. Now, one thing to note is it does have the micro module bay. If you're only using different flavors of Express LRS, that's no big deal. You just leave the cover on there. But like for me, I still have my Ghost module plugged into the back of my Boxer. I don't remember the last time I actually used that, so it's not significant for me. But if you do fly Crossfire or something like that, keep in mind you're going to need a module that's going to stick out just a little bit. What do you think in the comments, guys? Is this something that you're going to want to try? Is this the sweet spot? Has AG01 been just a tiny bit big for you, or has the AG01 Mini been a little bit too small? This one comes right in the middle, and it could be just right. Thanks, guys.